I tapped the oxygen pressure gauge twice with my index finger, a habit I'd developed after 8 years of deep-sea dives. The needle jumped slightly before settling back at 3,400 psi, full tanks, enough for 12 hours under optimal conditions. My standard pre-dive ritual continued as I methodically checked every system in the observation bell, a 10-foot spherical chamber of reinforced titanium that would soon be my only protection against the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. "Leon, we're already 20 minutes behind schedule," Caden called from the deck. "Wrap up those checks and get ready for deployment." I ignored him, continuing through my checklist. External lights, functional. Life support redundancy, online. Emergency ascent mechanism, responsive. Communication array, clear signal. Each item required verification, regardless of Caden's impatience. Something felt off today. I couldn't identify the source of my uneasiness. The weather was calm. Equipment readings were normal, and the mission parameters were straightforward. Descend to observe and document marine life in the upper reaches of the Puerto Rico Trench for Dr. Ryan's research project. Yet a persistent knot tightened in my gut. "Seriously, Leon, what's the holdup?" Caden appeared at my side, his stocky frame blocking the morning sun. The Oceanic Research Industries logo on his pressed blue shirt seemed to glare at me accusingly. "Running the full equipment check," I said, not looking up from the control panel. The depth gauge calibration seemed slightly off. "We calibrated everything yesterday." Caden checked his watch. "The research team is waiting for those specimens, and we're burning fuel keeping the ship positioned." I gestured to the digital readout. "Yesterday's calibration is showing a 3% deviation. Standard protocol says..." "Standard protocol is eating into our research window." Caden snatched my clipboard, flipped through the pages, and scribbled his initials at the bottom. "I'm signing off on the equipment. It's fine." I took back the clipboard, my jaw tightening. 3% at maximum depth means a potential error of nearly 600 feet in the Puerto Rico Trench. That's not insignificant. Caden's hazel eyes narrowed behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Look, I've got the board breathing down my neck about research quotas. Dr. Ryan needs these samples for her presentation next week. We don't have time for your excessive caution." He walked away before I could respond, already barking orders at the deck crew to prepare for deployment. My uneasiness intensified. I'd worked enough dives to know that rushing safety checks inevitably led to problems. Sometimes fatal ones. I climbed into the bell and settled into the pilot's chair, connecting my diving suit to the bell's life support systems. The cramped interior was packed with monitoring equipment, sample collection tools, and emergency supplies. Outside, crew members secured the hatch, the heavy clang of metal on metal signaling my isolation from the world above. I activated the communication system. "Surface control. This is Leon. Comms check." Jerry's voice came through immediately, the familiar sound somewhat reassuring. "Reading you loud and clear, Leon. All systems look good from here." "Confirming manual override systems are functional," I said, testing the mechanical backup controls that could save my life if electronics failed. "All green," Jerry replied, but Caden's hovering over my shoulder giving me the hurry-up signal. "Tell him I'm still testing the emergency release mechanism. He says..." Jerry paused, then continued with obvious restraint. "He says it's been tested twice this week already." I sighed. "Fine. Seal integrity confirmed. Ready for deployment." "Copy that. Initiating deployment sequence in 30 seconds. The crane above began to whir as it lifted the observation bell from the deck. Through the thick viewport, I watched the research vessel grow smaller, the faces of the crew turning into indistinguishable dots. The bell swayed slightly in the breeze before I felt the first touch of water at the base. "Entering water now," I reported. "Beginning descent." The blue surrounded me as I sank beneath the surface. Sunlight filtered through the water, creating shifting patterns across my control panel. I activated the external cameras to record the descent for Dr. Ryan's research team. Passing 50 meters, I said. All systems nominal. Copy that, Jerry responded. Current rate of descent is standard at 5 meters per minute. As I descended, the ocean transformed around me. The vivid blue faded gradually to a deeper, more somber shade. Schools of fish scattered from my path, their silver bodies catching the diminishing light. I documented each species I recognized, noting their depth and behavior patterns. 200 meters. Visibility still good. Logging a large school of what appear to be yellowfin tuna. Dr. Ryan will be thrilled, Jerry said. She's been tracking their migration patterns. The descent continued steadily. The familiar pressure built in my ears despite the bell's regulated interior atmosphere, a psychosomatic response from years of diving that my brain couldn't quite shake. At 500 meters, the last meaningful rays of sunlight disappeared, leaving me in the artificial glow of the bell's external lights. The water darkened to a deep blue-black that swallowed the light beams after just a few meters. I switched the cameras to low-light mode. Passing 600 meters, documenting several specimens of deep-water jellyfish, visibility limited to range of external lights. Copy that, Jerry replied. All readouts normal. Temperature at your depth is holding at 6 degrees Celsius. I continued logging observations as various deep-sea creatures appeared in my lights. Bizarre fish with oversized jaws and bioluminescent patterns, translucent shrimp with impossibly long antennae, gelatinous creatures of unknown classification. Dr. Ryan would have her hands full analyzing the footage. Approaching 1,000 meters, I reported. Pressure hull integrity at 98%, within expected parameters. Copy, Leon. You're right on schedule now, so Caden's happy. Jerry's voice carried a hint of relief. How are... The bell suddenly lurched sideways, throwing me against my harness. Warning lights flashed across my control panel. Surface. We have unexpected turbulence, I called, my hands flying over the stabilization controls. Possible strong current. Requesting pause in descent. Jerry's voice came back fragmented. Reading unusual. Signal. Not sure. Another violent jolt rocked the bell, stronger than the first. I grabbed the console to steady myself as alarms began to wail throughout the tiny chamber. Jerry? What's happening? I shouted into the comm. Leon, we're seeing interference, tether tension. Jerry's voice cut off mid-sentence, replaced by a burst of static. Surface, do you copy, Jerry? I frantically adjusted the communication settings, trying to re-establish contact. The bell suddenly pitched forward, throwing me hard against the control panel. Pain shot through my shoulder as metal met bone. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs as emergency lights bathed the interior in pulsing red. Mayday, mayday, I called, fighting to right myself in the pilot's chair. Surface team, this is Leon, do you copy? Only static answered me. The observation bell was now spinning, the viewport showing alternating views of black water and the faint, receding glow of the tether lights above me. The spinning accelerated, disorienting me as I struggled to reach the stabilization controls. With dawning horror, I realized what was happening. The violent movement wasn't from ocean currents. It was the sensation of free fall. My eyes locked on the tether status indicator, now flashing an urgent red warning. Connection lost. No, 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 I whispered, fingers flying across the emergency protocols. The depth gauge that had been steadily counting down now spun wildly, the numbers blurring as they climbed higher. 100 meters, 200, 300. I slammed my hand on the emergency communication button. Surface, the tether has snapped. I repeat, the tether has snapped. I'm in free fall. The static continued, unbroken by any human voice. I knew the truth even as I continued calling. Without the fiber optic connection in the tether, direct communication with the surface was impossible. The Bell had backup systems for short-range acoustic communication, but those were designed for controlled situations, not a catastrophic tether failure. I fought against panic, forcing myself to breathe evenly while assessing my options. The Bell continued its chaotic descent, occasionally hitting the walls of the underwater canyon, each impact sending fresh jolts of fear through me. The depth gauge kept climbing. 1,600 meters, 1,700, 1,800. According to the emergency protocols, the Bell's automatic stabilizers should activate at 2,000 meters, designed to slow and control descent in case of partial tether failure. I watched the numbers climb, praying the system would work as designed. At 2,000 meters, I felt the stabilizers kick in. The spinning slowed, then stopped as small external fins deployed, bringing the Bell back to a level position. The sudden stability allowed me to think more clearly. Okay, I muttered to myself. Stabilizers working. Next step, emergency ascent. I accessed the flotation system controls, designed to inflate large external bladders that would carry the Bell back to the surface in an emergency. My finger hovered over the activation button for 3 seconds before pressing it firmly. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, then again. The system status remained unchanged. Ready, awaiting activation. Come on. I slammed my fist against the panel, trying every override code I knew. The system diagnostic returned a chilling message. Deployment mechanism damaged. Unable to execute. The impact that had thrown me against the controls must have damaged the deployment mechanism. Without it, the emergency flotation system was useless, just tanks of compressed air with no way to inflate the bladders. I watched helplessly as the depth gauge continued its relentless count. 2,200 meters, 2,300, 2,400. The stabilizers were slowing my descent, but they couldn't stop it. The Bell was designed to operate at a maximum depth of 3,000 meters. Beyond that, even its reinforced hull would begin to show stress from the crushing pressure. I was completely at the mercy of gravity now, plummeting deeper into the darkness of the Puerto Rico Trench, a massive underwater canyon that reached depths of over 8,000 meters in places. If I couldn't find a way to arrest my descent or signal my location, I would either be crushed by pressure or slowly suffocate when my oxygen ran out. The light from the surface had long since vanished. Outside my viewport, the abyss waited. Something moved outside the viewport. I blinked twice, trying to clear my vision in the dim emergency lighting of the observation bell. The external flood still worked, casting pale blue beams into the abyss that surrounded me. There it was again, a massive shadow crossing through the light, too large and too fast to be anything I recognized from this depth. The depth gauge read 2,500 feet and climbing steadily. I was well beyond the safety parameters of normal diving operations and heading deeper by the second. My training kicked in as I ran through my survival options. First priority, air supply. I checked the gauge on my primary tank, about 6 hours remaining if I kept my breathing steady. 6 hours to figure out how to stop this free fall or signal my position. The shadow returned, closer this time. What I saw made no logical sense. The creature was enormous, its body a perfect streamlined torpedo shape ending in a crescent tail that propelled it with shocking speed. As it banked and turned back toward the Bell, I got a clear view of its profile. The distinctive shape of a shark, but on a scale that defied belief. That's impossible, I whispered to myself. The creature was a megalodon, a prehistoric shark species extinct for over 2 million years. Yet here it was, circling my observation bell like a curious predator. Its skin wasn't the typical gray of modern sharks, but a mottled pattern of dark blue-gray on top, fading to lighter tones underneath. Perfect camouflage for deep water hunting. I pressed closer to the viewport, professional curiosity momentarily overriding my fear. The creature must have been at least 50 feet long, larger than a school bus. Its triangular teeth, visible when it opened its jaws slightly, were each the size of my hand. The bell suddenly lurched sideways, throwing me against the control panel. The megalodon had nudged the bell with its snout, sending us into a slow spin. I grabbed the stability handles mounted on either side of the viewport and steadied myself, fighting a wave of nausea as the external view whirled. It's testing the bell, I realized aloud. My mind raced through everything I knew about shark behavior. Modern great whites were known to bump and test objects before deciding whether to attack. This prehistoric monster was treating my observation bell like a falling nutshell, waiting for it to crack against the ocean floor. The bell wasn't designed to withstand impact at this depth. The shark somehow knew that. The depth gauge continued its relentless climb. 2,700 feet, 2,800 feet, 2,900 feet. At 3,000 feet, the titanium frame made an ominous groaning sound that reverberated through the small chamber. The bell was approaching its maximum rated depth. Beyond this point, the manufacturers couldn't guarantee structural integrity under the crushing pressure. I needed a plan. The emergency protocols manual was stored in a waterproof sleeve beneath the control panel. I pulled it out and flipped through the laminated pages with shaking fingers until I found the section on emergency ascent procedures. The bell had external ballast weights with explosive release bolts. In theory, jettisoning the weights would create positive buoyancy, causing the bell to rise toward the surface. But the manual included multiple warnings about using this system during controlled descents, let alone in free fall. I weighed my options. Triggering the release now, while falling at this rate, could cause a catastrophic pressure change inside the bell. The sudden acceleration upward might damage the already stressed hull. On the other hand, hitting the ocean floor at terminal velocity would certainly be fatal. The shark returned, swimming a tighter circle around the bell. This time it moved with deliberate slowness, as if studying me. It aligned itself with the viewport, and I found myself staring into an eye the size of a dinner plate, a black pupil surrounded by a deep blue iris. The eye of an apex predator that had ruled the ancient seas, looking directly at me. In that moment, I wasn't just scared. I was awestruck. This was a perfect living specimen of a species believed extinct for millions of years, a discovery that would rewrite marine biology textbooks. If I survived, my name would be linked with this discovery forever. The scientific community would have to acknowledge what I was seeing right now. The depth gauge hit 3,500 feet. The groaning of the hull grew more pronounced, and I noticed one of the internal support struts had developed a slight bend. The bell wasn't designed for these depths. Every additional foot increased the pressure exponentially. "Come on, think," I muttered, tapping my fingers against the emergency manual. There has to be something I can use. The megalodon made another pass, this time swimming beneath the bell. From my vantage point, I could see its full size and proportions. It was at least 50 feet long, maybe larger. Its massive girth suggested it was well fed. There must be an entire ecosystem down here unknown to science. At 4,000 feet, I heard a faint cracking sound. My eyes darted to the edges of the viewport where hairline fractures had appeared in the specialized glass. The fissures were tiny, barely visible, but their presence sent a chill through my body. If the viewport failed at this depth, the pressure would crush me instantly. The shark changed its behavior, seemingly sensing the bell's structural weakness. It circled tighter now, occasionally brushing against the metal shell. During one pass, it turned its head slightly and scraped its massive teeth against the exterior. The sound vibrated through the bell, a horrible screeching that made my teeth ache. The ancient predator was testing the durability of its prey's shell, waiting patiently for the inevitable moment when pressure and impact would crack it open. I stared at the hairline fractures spreading across the viewport like a spider web, knowing my options were vanishing as quickly as the observation bell dropped. The depth gauge now read 4,200 feet and climbing steadily. My mind ran calculations automatically. The bell's maximum rated depth was 3,000 feet. We had already passed that threshold, and the titanium frame's groaning had grown from occasional to constant. At this rate of descent, I had two possible outcomes. Either the pressure would crush the bell like an empty soda can, or we'd hit the ocean floor at terminal velocity. Neither scenario ended with me alive. "Think, Leon," I said out loud, my voice sounding thin in the confined space. The emergency protocols manual sat open on my lap, the pages illuminated by the dim red emergency lighting. I flipped back to the section on the ballast release system. It was my only chance. The system was designed to jettison the heavy iron weights attached to the bell's underside, creating instant positive buoyancy. In normal operations, we'd use it for a controlled ascent after research was complete. In my current situation, it was my only lifeline. The timing would be critical. Released too early, and I'd be vulnerable during a slow ascent with a prehistoric predator circling me. Too late, and the crushing pressure would render the system useless, or I'd already be dead. I glanced at the oxygen gauge. 5 hours of air remaining. That wouldn't matter if the bell imploded in the next 20 minutes. The massive shadow returned to my field of vision, and I tracked the megalodon as it circled the bell once more. The creature's movements had become more deliberate, less exploratory. It knew I was here. It was waiting. At 4,500 feet, I secured the manual back in its waterproof sleeve and began checking the emergency harness system. If I did manage to release the ballast, the sudden change in buoyancy would create intense G-forces inside the bell. Without proper restraint, I'd be tossed around like a rag doll. The hull creaked again, louder this time. A small stream of water had begun to seep through the seal around the viewport, creating a thin trickle that ran down the curved glass and pooled on the floor. I wiped my palm across my face, trying to clear my thoughts. "All right, let's run through this," I said to myself, focusing on the problem at hand. Ballast release is operational. Harness is intact. Depth is now. I checked the gauge again. 4,800 feet. The megalodon's behavior changed. I noticed it immediately. Rather than maintaining its circular pattern around the bell, it began to position itself differently, swimming lower, then turning to face upward. My stomach dropped as I understood its new strategy. It was moving directly below us. At 5,000 feet, I got a clear view of what the shark was doing. The massive creature had stationed itself beneath the falling bell, its mouth open to reveal row after row of triangular teeth, each easily the size of my hand. The serrated edges gleamed in the beam of the external lights. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," I muttered, the realization hitting me with full force. It's not hunting. It's waiting. The shark had figured out the bell's trajectory and was simply positioning itself to catch me like a falling piece of food. The primitive intelligence behind those ancient eyes was more calculating than I'd given it credit for. This wasn't random predatory behavior. This was strategic. Water was now coming in steadily through the cracking viewport. Not enough to create immediate danger, but the rate was increasing. I pulled the emergency harness from its storage compartment and began strapping myself in, my eyes darting between the depth gauge and the massive predator waiting below, 5,500 feet, 5,600 feet. 700 feet. The megalodon adjusted its position, aligning its massive jaws directly with the bell's path. I could see deep into its mouth now, the multiple rows of teeth leading into a dark gullet large enough to swallow the entire observation bell. I finished securing the 5-point harness around my chest and waist, tugging each strap to ensure it was tight. My hand hovered over the ballast release button, protected by a red plastic cover to prevent accidental activation. Not yet, I told myself. Too early and you're shark food. Too late and you're crushed by pressure. The bell shuddered violently as we passed 6,000 feet. The crack in the viewport widened noticeably, and the trickle of water became a steady stream. The pressure gauge on the wall was now pinned at its maximum reading. We were well beyond what this equipment was designed to handle. The megalodon remained in position, occasionally adjusting to stay directly in our path. I could see its gills flexing, its tail moving with minimal effort to maintain its position in the water column. It was waiting for its meal to arrive. My breathing quickened as I watched the depth gauge. 6,200 feet. 6,300 feet. The structural integrity of the bell was failing. A support strut near the hatch had bent visibly, and the seam where the viewport connected to the hull was leaking more steadily now. Small jets of water sprayed into the cabin from 3 different points. The cold water soaked through my diving undergarment, but I barely noticed. My focus remained on the gauge and the shark. 6,400 feet. I flipped the protective cover off the ballast release button. The moment was approaching. The manual recommended releasing ballast at a minimum of 500 feet from the seafloor, but I wasn't worried about hitting bottom anymore. I was worried about being swallowed whole by a creature that should have been extinct for millions of years. As the depth gauge hit 6,500 feet, the megalodon made its move. Its powerful tail flexed, propelling its massive body upward to intercept the falling bell. Its jaws opened wider, revealing the dark void of its throat. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my palm down on the release button. For a split second, nothing happened. Then a series of dull thuds resonated through the hull as the explosive bolts detonated, severing the connections to the heavy iron weights that had been pulling us down. The effect was immediate and violent. The sudden change in buoyancy caused the bell to jerk upward with tremendous force. I was slammed back into my seat, the harness cutting into my shoulders and chest as G-forces pinned me in place. My vision narrowed, darkening at the edges from the blood rushing from my head. Through the viewport, I caught a glimpse of something incredible. The megalodon, jaws wide open to catch the bell, instead clamped down on the discarded ballast weights that had just been jettisoned. The massive iron blocks disappeared into its mouth as the creature reflexively bit down on whatever had entered its jaws. The bell rocketed upward, leaving the shark behind. The sudden reversal of direction was so forceful that I could barely move, could barely breathe. I was completely pinned against my harness, my arms feeling like they weighed hundreds of pounds. But I was alive, and I was heading toward the surface. I watched through the viewport as the megalodon continued its descent, jaws clamped around the iron ballast weights instead of my observation bell. The massive prehistoric shark diminished into the darkness below, becoming just another shadow in the abyss. I had no time to marvel at my narrow escape as the bell shot upward with alarming speed. Without the stabilizing tether or the ballast weights, the bell spun wildly through the water column. I gripped the harness straps until my knuckles turned white, fighting to keep my eyes focused on a fixed point inside the cabin to maintain some sense of orientation. The rapid changes in pressure made my ears pop painfully every few seconds. "Come on. Hold together," I muttered as the bell continued its chaotic ascent. Water still leaked through the cracked viewport. but the pressure differential was changing. Instead of forcing more water in, the expanding air inside the bell now pushed some of it back out through the cracks. That was a good sign. It meant we were rising fast enough that the internal air was expanding faster than water could enter. But it also meant I faced a new danger, ascending too quickly through the water column. The depth gauge spun backward, the numbers becoming a blur as we rocketed upward. 5,000 feet, 4,500 feet, 4,000 feet. The bell rotated and bounced like a cork, slamming me against the harness with each violent movement. My stomach lurched, and I fought back waves of nausea as my inner ear struggled to make sense of the chaotic motion. I tried to focus on my breathing, keeping it slow and measured, despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. As a professional diver, I knew the dangers of rapid ascent. Nitrogen bubbles forming in the bloodstream, causing the bends or even an arterial gas embolism. The observation bell had its own atmosphere and pressure system, but the rapid change in external pressure still affected my body. At around 3,000 feet, the bell's ascent began to slow marginally as water resistance increased and the buoyancy differential lessened. The wild spinning eased somewhat, but the bell still bounced unpredictably through the water column. I checked the oxygen levels, still sufficient, but the gauge showed fluctuations from the damaged systems. When we reached 2,000 feet, I stretched my arm toward the control panel, fighting against the G-forces that still pressed me into my seat. My fingers found the emergency beacon switch, and I flipped it on. A steady red light began to pulse, indicating the signal was transmitting. The beacon would send ultrasonic pulses through the water that the surface team could detect, along with radio signals once we neared the surface. "Please be listening, Jerry," I said, hoping my surface technician was monitoring the emergency channels. I kept my eyes on the depth gauge as we continued to rise. 2,500 feet, 1,000 feet. The water outside the viewport gradually lightened from pitch black to a deep, dark blue. The change in visibility was both reassuring and concerning. I was getting closer to safety, but the observation bell was moving far too quickly for a safe ascent. At 500 feet, I caught my first glimpse of artificial light from above, the distant glow of the research vessel's powerful deck lights penetrating the water. Relief flooded through me, but I knew we weren't safe yet. The bell was still rising too fast, and without the tether to control our ascent or position, we could surface anywhere within a wide radius of the ship. "They're still there," I said to myself, a smile breaking across my face despite the pain and nausea. They waited. The lights grew brighter as we continued to rise. 300 feet, 200 feet, 100 feet. I braced myself for the surface breach, knowing it would be violent. The bell had slowed somewhat due to water resistance, but it still carried significant momentum. When we hit the surface, the impact was jarring. The bell shot upward like a missile, clearing the water completely before crashing back down with enough force to throw me against the harness again, knocking the wind from my lungs. Water sloshed violently inside the cabin as the bell bobbed and rocked on the surface, nearly capsizing from its own momentum before finding a tenuous equilibrium. I gasped for breath, my ribs aching from the impact against the harness. Outside, I could see the night sky for the first time in what felt like forever. A clear expanse of stars with the research vessel's lights visible about half a mile away. I fumbled with the harness release, my fingers clumsy with exhaustion and lingering adrenaline. The radio crackled to life suddenly, startling me. "Repeat, this is Research Vessel Horizon calling observation bell. Leon, do you copy? Over." I lunged for the radio handset, nearly dropping it in my haste. "Horizon, this is Leon in the bell. I copy. I'm on the surface, about half a mile from your position. Bell is damaged but stable. Request immediate extraction. Over." "Leon, thank God," Jerry's voice came through, relief evident even through the static. "We've got your beacon. Rescue boats are already on their way. Hang tight. Over." I turned my attention to the hatch above me. Under normal circumstances, it would remain sealed until the bell was recovered and secured on deck, but these were far from normal circumstances. The cracked viewport could fail completely at any moment, and I had no intention of drowning after surviving everything else. I checked the manual pressure gauge on the hatch. The bell's interior pressure had mostly equalized with the surface atmospheric pressure during the ascent, making it possible to open the hatch without specialized equipment. I twisted the locking wheel, straining against resistance until I felt the seal break with a hiss of escaping air. I pushed upward with all my remaining strength, and the hatch swung open. The rush of cool night air against my face was the sweetest sensation I'd ever experienced. I pulled myself halfway through the hatch, gulping deep breaths of fresh air as I scanned the horizon. 2 small boats with powerful searchlights had launched from the horizon and were speeding toward my position. Their beams cut across the water, sweeping back and forth until one locked onto the bell. I raised an arm and waved, confirming I was conscious and alert. While I waited, I took stock of my physical condition. My ears still ached from the pressure changes. My muscles were sore from being thrown against the harness, and my stomach remained unsettled from the wild ride. But I was alive, something that had seemed impossible when the tether snapped, and I plummeted into the abyss. The rescue boats arrived within minutes, circling the bell cautiously before one approached and cut its engine. A crew member threw a line, which I caught and secured to one of the external hooks. "Leon, you all right?" called a voice I recognized as Miguel from the deck crew. "Been better," I called back, my voice hoarse. "The bell's taking on water through a cracked viewport. I need to get off." They maneuvered closer, and 2 crew members helped me from the hatch onto their boat. My legs buckled as I tried to stand, the combination of physical exhaustion and lingering vertigo making it difficult to maintain my balance. They lowered me to a seat and wrapped an emergency blanket around my shoulders, while the second boat attached a tow line to the bell. The ride back to the horizon was mercifully short. As we approached, I saw figures lining the railings. The entire crew had come out to witness my return. A cheer went up as our boat came alongside, but I noticed the atmosphere seemed tense beneath the celebration. The crew helped me up the boarding ladder, hands steadying me from all sides as I climbed. When I finally stepped onto the deck, my legs gave out, and I would have collapsed if Jerry hadn't caught me. "Easy there, man," he said, supporting my weight. "You just pulled off the impossible." Looking around, I saw the crew was indeed in disarray. Some looked relieved, others angry, and a few seemed to be actively arguing near the equipment bay. Caden Porter stood apart from the others, his face unreadable as he watched me. Jerry helped me to a nearby crate where I could sit. He kept his voice low as he explained, "Caden insisted on using an older tether despite my objections. Said the newer one wasn't rated for the depth you were going. I told him that was backward. The new tether has a higher tensile strength, but he overruled me." Before I could respond, Jade Ryan pushed through the crowd, medical kit in hand. "Let me through," she said, kneeling in front of me. She shined a penlight in my eyes, checking pupil response. "Any dizziness, nausea, joint pain?" "All of the above," I admitted. "The bell came up way too fast, no controlled decompression." "We need to get him to the hyperbaric chamber," she told Jerry, then turned back to me. "Can you tell me what happened down there?" As Jade checked my vital signs, I recounted the events, the tether snapping, the uncontrolled descent, and finally, the megalodon. When I described the massive prehistoric shark, her hands paused momentarily before continuing their work. "Leon, what you're describing is impossible," she said carefully. "Carcharical's megalodon has been extinct for millions of years." "I know what I saw," I replied. too tired to argue forcefully. 50 feet long at minimum. Distinctive body shape. Teeth the size of my hand. Jade exchanged a glance with Jerry. Pressure at those depths can cause hallucinations, nitrogen narcosis, high-pressure nervous syndrome. They can create very vivid, very convincing illusions. I didn't respond. I knew what I'd seen, but I also knew how it sounded. A living fossil that had somehow escaped scientific detection for millions of years, conveniently appearing when I was alone with no recording equipment running. I couldn't blame them for their skepticism. Caden Porter approached, his face a careful mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. "Glad to see you made it back in one piece, Leon," he said, hands in his pockets. "Did you manage to capture any footage or data while you were down there? Anything at all?" The question struck me as odd. Not, "How are you feeling?" or "What went wrong?" but whether I had evidence. I studied his face, noticing an intensity in his gaze that seemed out of place. "No," I said flatly. The external cameras shut down when the tether snapped. No data, no footage, no samples, just what I saw with my own eyes. Something flickered across Caden's face. Disappointment, concern, relief. It was gone too quickly to interpret. "Well, the important thing is, you survived," he said, patting my shoulder awkwardly. "We'll debrief fully once you've had medical attention." Jerry and another crew member helped me stand, supporting me as we made our way below deck. The exhaustion hit me like a physical weight, making each step an effort. My mind kept replaying the image of the megalodon, its ancient eye studying me through the viewport. We reached the medical bay, where Jade directed them to help me onto an examination table. She began attaching monitoring equipment to track my vital signs. "We'll need to watch for delayed symptoms of decompression sickness," she explained. "You should rest here tonight where we can monitor you." I nodded, too tired to speak. The clean white sheets of the medical bay bed looked like the most inviting sight in the world. As Jerry and Jade helped me lie down, I caught snippets of their whispered conversation. Pressure-induced hallucination. Tether shouldn't have snapped. What was Caden thinking? Their voices faded as exhaustion finally overcame me. The last thing I remembered was the feeling of the ship rocking gently beneath me, a welcome contrast to the violent motion of the bell. Despite the pain and lingering nausea, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel again. The simple comfort of being alive. I woke up to hushed voices nearby. My body felt heavy, like someone had replaced my blood with lead. The medical bay lights were dimmed, but I could make out the silhouettes of Jade and Jerry standing near the doorway. "The company's already calling it equipment failure," Jerry said, his voice low but tense. "They're saying the tether was compromised during installation." "That's convenient," Jade replied. "We both know Caden rushed the whole setup. Leon's lucky to be alive." I shifted slightly, trying to ease the stiffness in my back. The movement sent a wave of dull pain through my ribs, where the harness had dug in during my rapid ascent. My throat felt raw from the recycled air I'd been breathing in the bell. Jerry noticed I was awake and stepped closer. "Hey, welcome back. You've been out for about 6 hours. "Water," I managed to say. My voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Jade handed me a plastic cup with a straw. The cool water felt amazing against my parched throat. I took a moment to assess my condition. Sore but intact, no signs of serious decompression sickness. "What's this about equipment failure?" I asked once I could speak properly. Jade and Jerry exchanged glances. It was Jerry who answered. "The official line from Oceanic Research is that the tether had a manufacturing defect. They're blaming the equipment supplier, not Caden's protocols." "That's bullshit," I said, trying to sit up. My head spun slightly with the effort. Caden skipped half the safety checks. He kept pushing to speed things up. Jade put a hand on my shoulder. Take it easy. Your body's been through a lot. She checked my vitals on the monitor beside the bed. Your oxygen levels are still stabilizing. You need rest. What about my report? The megalodon? I asked. Another look passed between them. This time it was Jade who spoke. Leon, extreme pressure at those depths can cause hallucinations. What you described, a 50-foot prehistoric shark that's been extinct for millions of years, it's not scientifically plausible. I know what I saw, I insisted. It wasn't a hallucination. It tried to eat me. Jerry checked his watch. I need to get back to the comm station. The recovery team is still securing the bell. He gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. Glad you're back with us, man. After Jerry left, Jade ran through some basic neurological tests, tracking her finger with my eyes, answering simple questions. I cooperated, but my mind was racing. If the company was already spinning a narrative about equipment failure, what else were they hiding? I need to see the bell, I said, once Jade finished her examination. Not a chance. You're on bed rest for at least 24 hours. Jade, please. I need to check the data logs. She shook her head. The recovery team is handling all that. Your job right now is to recover. She left me with strict instructions to stay in bed, promising to return in a few hours. As soon as the door closed behind her, I sat up more fully. My body protested, but I ignored it. If no one else was going to investigate what really happened, I would. I waited 15 minutes to make sure Jade wasn't coming back, then carefully disconnected the monitoring equipment. The medical bay was on the same level as the research deck where they would have brought the observation bell. I pulled on a clean set of clothes someone had left, folded on a nearby chair, moving gingerly to avoid aggravating my bruised ribs. The corridor outside the medical bay was quiet. Most of the research team would be in their quarters or the mess hall this time of day. I made my way toward the aft deck, where damaged equipment was typically assessed. The observation bell sat on a reinforced platform, water still dripping from its damaged frame. The viewport was cracked exactly as I remembered, and the hull showed visible stress marks. A laptop connected to the bell's data port sat unattended on a nearby workstation. I glanced around to make sure I was alone, then sat down at the laptop. The data logs were already open. Someone had been reviewing the dive telemetry. I scrolled through the information, looking for anything unusual. The depth readings matched my memory. The uncontrolled descent to over 6,000 feet, the rapid ascent after I jettisoned the ballast. But something caught my eye in the system's diagnostics. The tether connection showed a power surge approximately 30 seconds before it severed. That wasn't consistent with material failure or stress fracture. It looked more like an electrical overload. I dug deeper into the logs, checking the pre-dive systems tests. According to the data, someone had accessed the tether housing less than an hour before my dive, well after the official equipment check had been completed. The access was logged under a generic maintenance ID, not assigned to any specific crew member. Someone had tampered with the tether connection. This wasn't an accident or rushed protocols. This was deliberate. I downloaded the logs onto a spare flash drive I found in the workstation drawer. As I was finishing, I noticed movement near the observation bell. Jerry stood examining the severed end of the tether cable, turning it over in his hands with a troubled expression. I approached him quietly. Find anything interesting? Jerry startled slightly. Jesus, Leon, you should be in the medical bay. I needed to see this for myself. I nodded toward the tether. What do you think? Jerry hesitated, then held out the cable end for me to see. Look at this. Clean cut through the power conduits, but the load-bearing fibers show stress fraying. It's like someone weakened it structurally, then triggered an electrical surge to finish the job. That's exactly what the logs show, I said, lowering my voice. Someone accessed the housing right before the dive. Jerry's eyes widened. You're saying this was sabotage? I think someone wanted that bell to fail. The question is why. I glanced around to make sure we were still alone. Caden was pushing hard to get me down there, rushing every safety protocol. You think Caden did this? Jerry looked skeptical. Why would he risk a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment in your life? I don't know. Maybe he needed it to look like an accident? Or maybe he never expected I'd go that deep, just enough to abort the mission? Jerry rubbed his face. Look, be careful with accusations. Oceanic Research has military contracts you don't know about. They've been interested in deep-sea predators for years. Something about natural adaptations that could be applied to submersible technology. What are you saying? I'm saying there's more going on here than a research dive. And if someone did sabotage that tether, they're not going to want you asking questions. Jerry put a hand on my shoulder. Watch your back, Leon. Before I could respond, we heard voices approaching. Jerry quickly moved away from me, pretending to check something on the bell's exterior. Caden entered with two men I didn't recognize. They wore plain clothes, but their posture and haircuts screamed military. Caden stopped short when he saw me. Guerrero, you should be in medical. His tone was flat, not concerned. I wanted to check on the bell, I replied, keeping my voice casual. One of the men with Caden was removing a small black box from the bell's control panel. It looked like the main data storage unit. What's going on here? I asked. Standard recovery procedure, Caden said. We need to document everything for the insurance claim. And the megalodon? Are you documenting that too? Caden's expression hardened. There was no megalodon, Guerrero. You experienced pressure-induced hallucinations. I know what I saw. What you think you saw, Caden corrected. Look, the company doesn't need stories about prehistoric sharks circulating. It creates unnecessary complications. Complications for what? For our research grants, for our reputation in the scientific community. Caden stepped closer. We're here to study deep ocean currents, not chase sea monsters. Am I clear? I held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. No point arguing now. I needed more evidence. Crystal clear, I said. Good. Now get back to the medical bay before Dr. Ryan sends out a search party. I left without another word, but my mind was racing. They were removing evidence, and Caden was working hard to discredit my megalodon sighting. Something was definitely wrong. I spent the rest of the day in the medical bay, pretending to rest while planning my next move. The research lab would have copies of all the bell's external camera footage. If I could access that, I might find proof of what I'd seen. Just after midnight, when the ship had quieted down, I slipped out of the medical bay again. My body still ached, but the urgency of finding answers pushed the pain aside. The research lab was dark, except for the glow of standby lights on the equipment. I used my access card to get in, then locked the door behind me. The main computer station took a minute to boot up. I logged in with my credentials and navigated to the external camera archives. Most of the files were corrupted, not surprising given the pressure damage to the bell's systems. I searched through fragment after fragment, finding only static or darkness. Then, in a subfolder marked Cam3 Backup, I found one intact video file. The timestamp matched my time at maximum depth. I opened the file, my heart pounding. Most of it was too dark to see anything clearly, but about 2 minutes in, something moved across the frame. I slowed the playback, advancing frame by frame. There it was, a massive eye, at least the size of my head, staring directly into the camera. The distinctive iris structure was unlike any modern shark I'd ever encountered, with a vertically slit pupil surrounded by a ring of deep amber. The texture and coloration matched no known shark species on record. This was undeniable proof. I paused the video on that frame, staring at the eye that had stared at me in the depths. It was unsettling how intelligent it looked, calculating, ancient, and aware. This wasn't just a predator. It was a survivor from a time when the ocean had different rules. I needed to save this. I plugged in the flash drive I'd used earlier and started copying the file. The progress bar moved slowly across the screen, the file size larger than I expected due to the high-resolution camera used in deep-sea research. While I waited, I examined the frame more closely. Behind the eye, I could make out the faint outline of the creature's head, the distinctive broad, flattened snout structure of a megalodon. No modern great white had these exact proportions. This was the smoking gun that would prove I wasn't hallucinating. The file transfer reached 60%. I tapped my fingers impatiently on the desk, glancing occasionally at the door. Each minute I stayed here increased my risk of discovery. 80%. I prepared to disconnect as soon as the transfer completed. I'd need to hide this somewhere safe until I figured out my next move. If Oceanic Research was willing to sabotage equipment and cover up discoveries, they wouldn't hesitate to destroy evidence. 95%. Almost there. The screen flashed. Transfer complete. I clicked to safely eject the drive, tucking it into my pocket. As I moved to shut down the computer, I heard the distinctive sound of a key card sliding through the reader at the lab door. The lock disengaged with a soft click, and the door began to open behind me. I dropped to the floor behind the lab counter as the door swung open. My ribs screamed in protest, but I bit down on my lip to keep quiet. The flash drive with the megalodon footage was still plugged into the computer. I hadn't finished copying the file. Caden's voice filled the room. Check everything. I want all recording devices wiped clean before morning. I pressed my back against the metal cabinet, making myself as small as possible. 2 sets of heavy footsteps followed Caden's lighter ones. Through the narrow gap between the counter and floor, I saw black tactical boots, not the standard issue deck shoes worn by our research crew. Sir, what about the primary memory core? One of the men spoke with a clipped, professional tone that reminded me of military personnel I'd worked with on previous expeditions. Everything, Caden said, especially footage from depths greater than 4,000 feet. The observation bell's cameras, the external sensors, all of it needs to be scrubbed. My heart pounded so hard I worried they might hear it. I slowly reached up and felt the edge of the counter, trying to gauge how visible the computer screen might be from their position. And the diver? Guerrero? The second security man asked. Caden snorted. He's still in medical. Too drugged up to be a problem tonight. Tomorrow we'll feed him the company line about equipment failure. He'll play along if he wants to keep his job. I almost laughed. Caden clearly didn't know me very well. What about the specimen? The first man asked. My breath caught. Specimen. Not hallucination. Not pressure-induced vision. Specimen. That's why we're going back down tomorrow, Caden said, his voice dropping to an excited whisper. The client is very interested after seeing our initial readings. They're sending a specialized containment team. If we can lure it close enough to the surface... With all due respect, sir, the second man interrupted. That thing took down a reinforced observation bell. How exactly do you plan to contain it? That's not your concern, Caden snapped. Your job is to make sure we have a clean slate. No evidence of the first encounter. As far as anyone knows, tomorrow's dive is a standard equipment recovery operation. They moved toward the main computer terminal, the one I'd just been using. I held my breath, praying the screen had gone to sleep. A few more seconds, and they'd see the half-copied file. A radio crackled. "Porter, come in." Jerry's voice came through one of their communication devices. Caden sighed. "What is it, Carter?" "The recovery team needs your authorization on the observation bell repairs. They're waiting in the equipment bay." Caden cursed under his breath. "Fine. I'm coming." He turned to the security men. "Finish checking this room, then move on to the communications center. I want all external transmission logs from the past 24 hours. "Yes, sir." Caden's footsteps retreated and the door closed. I remained frozen, listening to the two men moving around the lab. One of them approached the computer I'd been using. "Screen's on," he muttered. "Someone's been here." I silently cursed myself for not locking the computer before hiding. The man tapped a few keys. "File transfer in progress. Flash drive connected." My heart sank. They'd found my evidence. "Wipe it," the other man said, "and check the room. Whoever was using this might still be here." I glanced around desperately. There was no way out from behind the counter without being seen. The only door was across the lab, and both men stood between me and it. The first man began opening cabinets near me. In seconds, he'd find me crouching like a guilty child. I needed a distraction. I reached into my pocket and felt my access card. An idea formed. I took a deep breath, pulled out the card, and slid it across the floor toward the far side of the lab. It skittered across the tiles before coming to rest near a storage locker. Both men turned at the sound. What was that? One of them drew what looked like a sidearm. "Over there." They moved away from the computer, giving me my chance. I rose in one painful motion, yanked the flash drive from the port, and bolted for the door. The men shouted behind me as I slammed my access card against the reader and tumbled into the corridor. The door hissed shut just as one of them reached it. I didn't wait to see if they had access cards of their own. I ran, ignoring the pain in my ribs, heading toward the residential section of the ship where I knew Jade's quarters would be. The ship's night lighting cast long shadows down the empty corridors. I heard the lab door open behind me and quickened my pace, turning a corner and pressing myself into an alcove housing emergency equipment. The security men ran past, heading toward the deck, likely assuming I'd try to find help there. Once their footsteps faded, I made my way to Jade's door and knocked urgently. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. "Jade, it's Leon. Open up." The door cracked open and Jade's face appeared, creased with sleep and annoyance. "Leon, you should be in medical. What are you—" I pushed past her into the room. "Close the door, quickly." She complied, more out of surprise than agreement. "What's going on? You look terrible." "I need to show you something." I held up the flash drive. "Is your laptop in here?" She nodded toward her desk where a computer sat among stacks of research papers. "Yes, but—" I moved to the desk and plugged in the drive. "I wasn't hallucinating, Jade. I saw it. And I have proof." She stood beside me, arms crossed. "Leon, extreme pressure can— Look." I opened the video file and turned the screen toward her. The footage was dark and grainy, captured by one of the external cameras on the observation bell. For several seconds, nothing was visible except murky water. Then a massive shape moved across the frame, and the camera's light caught a giant, prehistoric eye, an eye I'd stared into at 6,000 feet below the surface. Jade's arms uncrossed slowly as she leaned toward the screen. That's not possible. It's real. A living megalodon. And Caden knows. I quickly explained what I'd overheard in the lab. He's planning another dive tomorrow to capture it for some client. He called it a specimen. Jade sank into her chair. This explains so much. She rubbed her temples. For months, Caden's been redirecting our research priorities. Areas we'd normally avoid. Depths beyond our standard parameters. I thought he was just pushing for breakthrough discoveries, but... She looked up at me. I think he's working with Biomarine Defense. The military contractor? She nodded. They specialize in weaponizing marine biology. Imagine what they could do with tissue samples from a creature that's survived unchanged for millions of years. The regenerative properties alone would be worth billions. I paced the small room. We need to stop tomorrow's dive. If he's willing to risk my life once, he'll do it again. We need Jerry, Jade said. He has access to all the maintenance logs. If Caden tampered with your equipment... He did. I was certain of it now. Then Jerry can prove it. She stood up. His quarters are 2 decks up. We should go now, before those security men come back. We made our way through the quiet ship, taking service ladders instead of the main stairwells to avoid being seen. Jerry's quarters were in the technicians section, a cramped area near the communications center. Jade knocked softly. No response. She knocked again, harder. Jerry, wake up. It's Jade and Leon. We heard shuffling inside before the door opened. Jerry stood there in a t-shirt and shorts, hair sticking up in all directions. What time is it? He mumbled, then saw my face. Leon? You should be in medical. That's what everyone keeps telling me. I pushed into his room. We need your help. Jerry listened intently as we explained everything. The megalodon footage, Caden's plans for another dive, the suspected sabotage. When we finished, he sat on the edge of his bed, stunned. I knew Caden cut corners, but this... He shook his head. This is criminal. Can you access the Bell's maintenance logs? Jade asked. We need proof that Caden ordered the safety features disabled. Jerry nodded. My station has direct access. Follow me. We moved cautiously to the communications center, which was empty at this hour. Jerry sat at his workstation and began typing, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Here, he said after several minutes. Maintenance requests from the past month. He scrolled through entries. Look at this. 3 weeks ago, Caden ordered a weight reduction modification to the observation bell. They removed half the emergency flotation devices and replaced the primary tether with a lighter model rated for only 2,000 feet. But my dive plan clearly stated a target depth of 3,000 feet, I said, leaning over his shoulder. Exactly. Jerry pointed to another entry. And here, the day before your dive, someone disabled the automatic ascent protocol that would have triggered if the tether failed. Jade's face hardened. He wanted you to go deep, Leon. The question is, did he expect you to find the megalodon, or did he already know it was there? Either way, I said, he's planning to use me as bait tomorrow. The perfect plan. Send down the same diver who had the hallucination to recover lost equipment. If I disappear for good this time, everyone will assume I was unstable after the first accident. Jerry checked his watch. It's 4:30 a.m. The dive prep meeting is at 7. We don't have much time. We quickly formed a plan. I would attend the meeting and appear cooperative about the new dive, buying time while Jerry sabotaged the launching equipment to prevent the bell from being deployed. Meanwhile, Jade would use her satellite phone to contact colleagues at the Marine Biology Institute, who had connections to regulatory authorities. "If we can delay the dive for even a few hours," Jade said, "it might be enough time for outside help to arrive." Dawn was breaking as we separated. I returned to the medical bay, slipping into bed just as the morning nurse came to check on me. I pretended to have just woken up, complaining about pain to explain my elevated heart rate and blood pressure. At 7 sharp, I walked into the briefing room where the dive team had gathered. Caden stood at the front, looking surprised to see me on my feet. "Guerrero," he said with forced cheerfulness. "Good to see you up and about. How are you feeling?" "Ready to work," I lied. "I heard we're planning a recovery dive." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's right. Some valuable equipment was lost during your incident. The company wants it retrieved." I nodded, noting the same 2 security men from the lab standing at the back of the room. "And you want me to go down again? After what happened?" "You're our most experienced deep water diver," Caden said smoothly. "And you're already familiar with the conditions down there." The way he emphasized conditions made my skin crawl. I maintained a neutral expression. "Of course. When do we launch?" Caden turned to address the entire team. "We'll deploy at 900. The observation bell has been repaired and reinforced. This time, we'll be using a double tether system for added security." He glanced at me. "Leon will lead the expedition to retrieve our equipment from the sea floor." In that moment, looking into his calculating eyes, I knew with absolute certainty that Caden had no interest in recovering equipment. He wanted the megalodon, and he was using me as bait to lure it. I stared at the observation bell hanging from the crane, its sleek form reflecting the morning sun. The once familiar equipment now felt like a death trap. I flexed my fingers, feeling the small weight of the earpiece Jerry had slipped me earlier, hidden in my diving suit's collar. It was our insurance policy, our only chance of surviving whatever Caden had planned. "Ready for round 2 with the abyss?" Caden approached from behind, slapping me on the shoulder with false camaraderie. "As ready as I'll ever be." I kept my voice neutral, hiding the anger burning inside me. Less than 12 hours ago, I discovered he had deliberately sabotaged my first dive. Now he expected me to willingly go back down. The deck buzzed with activity as the crew prepared for what they believed was a recovery mission. Only Caden, his security team, and the 3 of us knew the truth. This was a capture operation for a creature that shouldn't exist. A prehistoric megalodon shark, somehow surviving in the deepest part of the Puerto Rico Trench. I climbed into my diving suit methodically, checking each seal and connection with practiced movements. The weight of the suit felt reassuring, a second skin I'd worn hundreds of times before. But today, my usual pre-dive calm was replaced by hyper-awareness of every detail. I noted which crew members avoided eye contact. I counted the security personnel positioned around the deck. I watched Caden's every move. "Your pre-dive checklist, sir." A young crew member handed me a tablet. I scrolled through the list, immediately noticing modifications. The dive plan showed a target depth of 5,000 feet, deeper than my previous dive's intended depth. The equipment list excluded several backup systems that were standard protocol. "Everything looks good?" Caden asked, standing too close, watching over my shoulder. "Looks fine." I signed off on the tablet, the lie bitter on my tongue. I continued preparing while maintaining the appearance of cooperation. When no one was looking, I pressed the hidden button on my collar, activating the earpiece. "Testing. 1-2. Jerry's voice came through, quiet, but clear. "I've got eyes on the deck through camera 3. Jade's in position topside with her Coast Guard contact. They're waiting for our signal." I tapped my collar twice to acknowledge, a movement that looked like adjusting my suit. Guerrero, Caden called from the observation bell. Final checks. Let's move. I made my way to the bell, climbing inside with practiced ease despite my still aching ribs. The interior was familiar. Control panel, life support systems, viewport. But something felt wrong. Caden followed me in, supposedly to help with final preparations. "We've made some modifications since your last dive," he said, pointing to the control panel. "Streamlined the systems. You'll find it responds better." I nodded, noticing what he wasn't saying. The emergency beacon was missing. The backup oxygen tank was smaller than standard. The manual override for the tether had been removed entirely. "I'll take it from here," I said, wanting him out of the bell. Caden lingered, running his hand along the interior wall. "You know, Leon, discoveries like this come once in a lifetime. The company stands to make billions from what we find down there." "If it exists," I said, playing along with the fiction that I was uncertain about what I'd seen. "Oh, it exists." His eyes narrowed. "And today, we're going to prove it to the world." He paused at the hatch. "Good luck down there. Signal if you find anything interesting." The moment Caden left and sealed the hatch, I did a real equipment check. The oxygen gauge read 8 hours, half the standard supply for a dive of this depth. The emergency flotation system had been disabled. The communication system was locked to a single channel, Caden's. "Jerry, you reading me?" I whispered. "Loud and clear. What's the situation?" "Bad. He's gutted the safety systems and cut my oxygen supply. I've got maybe 8 hours, assuming normal consumption." "That son of a—" Jerry cut himself off. "Don't worry. I installed the bypass systems last night while security was changing shifts. Look under the secondary control panel. There's a black box with 3 switches." I found it immediately. A crude but effective addition hardwired into the bell's systems. First switch gives you control of the tether. Second activates the backup oxygen I hid in the maintenance compartment. Third is the emergency ascent system. Use it only if you have to. It'll be a rough ride up. Copy that. I flipped the second switch, and the oxygen gauge jumped to 14 hours. Not ideal, but better. The crane lifted the bell from the deck and swung it over the water. Through the viewport, I saw Caden watching from the command station, speaking into a radio. Behind him, 2 men in black loaded equipment onto a small submersible. "Heads up," Jerry's voice crackled in my ear. "They're launching something else. Looks like a specialized submersible with capture equipment." The observation bell hit the water with a muted splash, and the descent began. I reported normally through the official channel, giving Caden exactly what he expected to hear. Passing 200 feet. All systems normal. 500 feet. Visibility good. 800 feet. Hull integrity at 99%. At 1,000 feet, I activated Jerry's first switch, seizing control of the tether. The bell stopped descending immediately. "What's happening, Guerrero?" Caden's voice came through sharp and irritated. "Why have you stopped?" "Minor calibration issue," I lied. "Resolving it now." Through the viewport, I watched as Caden's submersible passed me, descending faster with its more powerful engines. It was smaller than the bell, built for maneuverability rather than observation, with mechanical arms extending from its sides. Behind it trailed what looked like a reinforced net system with metal weights. "They're deploying capture equipment," I told Jerry. "Some kind of heavy-duty net and—" "Are those tranquilizer launchers?" "Probably. Biomarine Defense has been developing deep-sea capture technology for years. Stay put until they're deeper. We don't want you in the middle when that thing shows up." I watched as the submersible continued its descent, becoming smaller in my view. At around 2,000 feet, it deployed what looked like underwater drones, small torpedo-shaped devices with lights that spread out in a search pattern. "They're hunting for it," I said. "Or using you as bait again," Jerry replied. "That's why they wanted you to go down first." Minutes passed as I held position, watching the submersible's lights grow dimmer with depth. The water outside was dark blue, transitioning to black below. I checked the external temperature gauge, 39 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping. Then I saw it, a massive shape moving below the submersible, so large it seemed impossible. The megalodon circled once, twice, staying just outside the range of the submersible's lights. "It's here," I breathed, "and it's even bigger than I remembered." The underwater drones converged on the shape, their lights illuminating sections of mottled gray skin. The submersible descended further, positioning the net below the shark. What happened next was chaos. The megalodon moved with shocking speed for its size, surging upward toward one of the drones. Its massive jaws opened, revealing rows of triangular teeth, each the size of my hand. It caught the drone and crushed it with one bite, sending fragments floating through the water. The submersible's lights focused on the shark, finally revealing its full size, at least 60 feet of prehistoric predator. The capture net deployed, spreading wide as it drifted toward the megalodon. But the shark wasn't finished. It circled back, faster this time, and charged directly at the net. Instead of avoiding it, the megalodon tore through it like tissue paper, metal cables snapping under the force of its attack. "My God," I heard Caden's voice over the radio, no longer speaking to me. "Fire the tranquilizers. Fire everything." The submersible launched what looked like harpoons trailing thin cables. Two hit the shark's thick hide, but seemed to have little effect. The megalodon turned, its massive eye, black and ancient, fixed on the submersible. "Get me out of here!" Caden's voice again, panicked now. "Full reverse! Full reverse!" The submersible's engines glowed blue as it tried to retreat, but the shark was too fast. The megalodon rammed the vessel with its snout, sending it spinning through the water. Metal groaned as one of the mechanical arms bent from the impact. "Leon, get out of there now!" Jerry's voice cut through my stunned observation. I hit the first switch again, resuming my descent. Not toward the chaos below, but moving laterally, putting distance between myself and the underwater battle. Through the viewport, I watched as the megalodon circled the damaged submersible, which was now leaking bubbles from multiple points. The submersible fired what looked like flares, creating bright spots in the dark water, a distraction. It worked momentarily. The shark veered away from the sudden light. The submersible began to ascend rapidly, trailing bubbles. But the megalodon wasn't fooled for long. It circled back, positioning itself below the rising vessel. "It's going to attack from below," I said, not sure if Jerry could hear the awe in my voice. The shark shot upward with incredible power, jaws wide. It caught the submersible midsection, metal crumpling under the pressure of its bite. I heard screaming over the radio, then static. The submersible's lights flickered as the megalodon shook it like a dog with a toy. When the shark released it, the vessel didn't rise or sink. It drifted sideways, clearly taking on water. "Jerry, they're in trouble down there." "Not your problem, Leon. Caden tried to kill you. Twice." I knew he was right. But watching the submersible's lights dim as it slowly began to sink deeper triggered something in me. The diver's code, that no one gets left behind. Then I saw movement inside the damaged vessel. Caden was alive, visible through a viewport, frantically working controls. The submersible's emergency thrusters fired weakly, pushing it into a slow ascent. The megalodon circled below, watching, waiting. "It's hunting them," I said, "playing with its food." This was my chance. While the shark was focused on the damaged submersible, I hit the third switch on Jerry's black box. The emergency ascent system engaged immediately. The explosive bolts on the tether detonated, freeing the bell from its connection to the surface. Hidden ballast weights dropped away, and the bell shot upward with gut-wrenching speed. I braced against the control panel as G-forces pushed me down. Through the viewport, I caught one last glimpse of the scene below. The megalodon surging upward again toward Caden's crippled submersible, jaws open wide. Then both disappeared from view as the bell rocketed toward the surface. The ascent was violent, but controlled. Nothing like the chaotic rise from my first encounter. Jerry's system included stabilizing fins that prevented the worst of the spinning. Still, I gripped the harness tight. My body pressed into the seat by the force of acceleration. "Coming up hot," I said through gritted teeth. "Tell Jade to stand clear." "Roger that. Coast Guard standing by. Jade has everything ready topside." Minutes later, the water outside lightened from black to blue to turquoise. The bell slowed naturally as water resistance increased, but we were still rising fast, too fast for normal decompression protocols. I'd need treatment for the bends when I reached the surface. The bell breached with a tremendous splash, bobbing violently on the surface. Through the viewport, I saw not just the horizon, but a Coast Guard vessel alongside it. Figures moved on both decks, pointing at my bell. I unlatched the hatch and pushed it open, gulping fresh air. The sky was overcast, threatening rain, a stark contrast to the blue morning of my departure. I pulled myself out onto the top of the bell, waving to the rescue boats already heading my way. The first boat to reach me carried Jade and 2 Coast Guard officers. "Leon, are you okay?" Jade called as they pulled alongside. "I need decompression treatment," I said, letting them help me into their boat. "But I'm alive." "What about Caden?" one of the officers asked. I pointed to the water. About 50 yards away, bubbles broke the surface, the last breath of air escaping from Caden's sinking submersible. "He went after it with a capture team," I explained. "The megalodon destroyed their equipment and attacked their submersible. I saw it take a second bite just as I started up." We all watched as the bubbles grew smaller, then stopped completely. The water became still, hiding the drama unfolding in the depths below. "The creature?" the second officer asked. "Following its prey back into the abyss," I said, "where it belongs." 2 days after the Coast Guard rescued us from the horizon, I sat in a government facility conference room that smelled like old coffee and industrial cleaner. The table stretched long enough to seat 12 people, though only 6 chairs were occupied. Jade sat to my left, her posture perfect as always, with a tablet and several research journals stacked neatly in front of her. Jerry slouched on my right, fidgeting with a pen, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as I had since the incident. Across from us sat 3 people who had introduced themselves with titles rather than names. A representative from Naval Intelligence in a crisp uniform with commander's insignia, a woman from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration wearing a business suit that looked like it came straight from a government catalog, and a man from what he vaguely described as oversight, likely CIA or some other agency that preferred ambiguity. The debriefing had been going for nearly 3 hours. My throat felt raw from talking. The water in my paper cup had long since disappeared, but I didn't ask for more. "Let's return to the moment when you first spotted the creature," said the NOAA representative, consulting her notes. "You're certain about the dimensions?" "Yes," I replied, my voice tired but firm. "At least 50 feet long. Dark blue-gray skin, teeth approximately 7 inches in length. Classic characteristics of Carcharodon megalodon, but with several notable differences from reconstructions based on fossil records. I'd repeated these details multiple times, but I understood why they kept circling back. What I'd seen shouldn't exist. "And Mr. Porter explicitly referred to it as a specimen?" asked the Naval Intelligence officer. "Yes," he said, and I quote, "The client is interested after seeing initial readings. He mentioned a specialized containment team being sent." The oversight man leaned forward. "And you believe Caden Porter deliberately sabotaged your equipment during the first dive?" "I know he did," I said. Jerry recovered the maintenance logs showing unauthorized modifications to the observation bell. The tether was replaced with one rated for only 2,000 feet, despite a planned dive to 3,000 feet. The emergency flotation system was removed. The automatic ascent protocol was disabled. I paused, my ribs still aching from the harness that had saved my life. He wanted me to go deep enough to confirm what their sensors had detected. I was bait. Jerry cleared his throat and slid a folder across the table. "These are the maintenance records I pulled before they could be deleted. The timestamps match what Leon told you." The Naval Intelligence officer took the folder and flipped through it. "The preliminary investigation confirms your account. Porter had unauthorized communications with Biomarine Defense, a private military contractor specializing in unusual marine applications." "Bioweapons," Jade translated flatly. "They've been trying to get research access to our deep-sea specimen collections for years, always with vague explanations about national security applications. We're not at liberty to discuss the full scope of Biomarine's activities," the NOAA representative said. "Of course not," I muttered. The oversight man tapped his pen against a legal pad. "What we can confirm is that Porter was acting outside official oceanic research industries' protocols. Several wire transfers to his personal accounts have been flagged. The investigation is expanding to include other executives who may have been aware of or involved in his extracurricular activities." I reached into my pocket and placed the flash drive on the table. "This contains the footage I recovered from the observation bell's external camera. It clearly shows the megalodon." The oversight man took the drive but didn't plug it into anything. "We appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Guerrero." "What happens with the information?" I asked. "The scientific community should know about this discovery." The three officials exchanged glances. "The footage will be analyzed thoroughly," the NOAA representative said carefully. "However, given the sensitive nature of the location and the implications of such a discovery, we'll need to follow strict protocols before any public disclosure can be considered." "You're burying it," I said. "We're processing it through appropriate channels," the Naval Intelligence officer corrected. Jade surprised me by speaking up. "Some discoveries benefit from careful documentation before public release, especially ones that could trigger environmental concerns or unregulated exploration attempts." I turned to look at her, wondering whose side she was on. She met my eyes and continued, "As scientists, we have responsibilities beyond mere discovery. The ocean depths are largely unprotected by international regulations. If commercial interests learned of a living megalodon—" I understood her point but didn't like it. "So we pretend it doesn't exist?" "No," she said. "We study it properly, with protection measures in place first." The debriefing wrapped up shortly after. We signed non-disclosure agreements that the oversight man assured us were standard procedure. The officials thanked us for our cooperation and mentioned that additional discussions might be necessary in the coming weeks. Their careful language and neutral expressions gave away nothing about what they really thought of our encounter. As we left the building, the bright coastal sunlight made me squint. The government facility overlooked the same harbor where the Horizon had been docked. The research vessel was gone now, likely impounded as part of the investigation. "Well, that was thoroughly unsatisfying," Jerry said as we walked down the concrete steps. "Think they'll actually do anything with that footage?" "They'll study it," Jade replied. "But public disclosure? I wouldn't expect anything soon." "You seemed pretty comfortable with their secrecy back there," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Jade stopped walking and turned to face me. "I'm comfortable with caution, Leon, not secrecy. There's a difference. You saw what Caden was willing to do to capture that creature. Do you think he's the only one who would exploit it?" I didn't have a good answer for that. We continued walking along the harbor promenade. The sun was high, reflecting off the water in a way that made me think of the bioluminescent creatures I'd seen during my descent. Normal tourists and locals passed by, unaware that just days ago we'd confirmed the existence of a prehistoric apex predator thought extinct for millions of years. "Look," Jerry said, pointing toward a cordoned-off section of the dock. The observation bell that had twice carried me to the depths sat on a flatbed trailer. Workers in Oceanic Research Industries uniforms were dismantling it piece by piece. The cracked viewport had been removed, and the titanium frame was being cut apart with acetylene torches. Sparks flew as they worked. "Evidence disposal," Jerry muttered. "Or just equipment salvage," Jade suggested. "That bell won't ever be seaworthy again." I watched as they removed the control panel where I'd sat, monitoring gauges and fighting for my life. It felt strange to see it dismantled so casually. "What will you do now?" Jade asked me. I'd been asking myself the same question since the Coast Guard pulled me from the water. Take a break from deep-sea work for starters. I'm not eager to go below 1,000 feet anytime soon. She nodded. "Understandable. I'm putting together a research team for a coral reef assessment project. Much shallower dives, mostly between 30 and 100 feet. We could use someone with your experience." I looked at her, surprised by the offer. "I thought you found my observations questionable." "I found your conclusion about a living megalodon scientifically improbable," she corrected. "But your observational skills and attention to detail were never in question." She smiled slightly. "And now that I've seen the footage, well, I value colleagues who notice what others miss." "Sounds safer than being shark bait," Jerry chimed in. "Plus, coral doesn't have teeth." "Some coral polyps are predatory," Jade said automatically, then caught herself when she saw our expressions. "But yes, significantly less dangerous than what you've been through." We reached the end of the harbor walk and stood looking out at the open ocean. Somewhere beyond that horizon, miles below the surface, lay the Puerto Rico Trench. I thought about the massive creature swimming in those dark waters, a living fossil that had somehow survived while the world above changed beyond recognition. "I'll join your team," I told Jade. "Shallower waters sound good right now." She smiled. "Excellent. We start planning next week." Jerry clapped me on the shoulder. "I'm heading back to the mainland tomorrow. Got a job offer from a research outfit in San Diego. No deep-sea work for them either." We stood there a while longer, talking about potential projects and next steps. The conversation felt normal, mundane even, which was exactly what I needed after everything that had happened. As Jerry described his new job prospects and Jade outlined her research goals, I found myself occasionally glancing toward the distant blue horizon. The trench was out there, hidden beneath the waves, along with its ancient inhabitant. For now, at least, its secrets remained where they belonged.